Good evening. I'm Gracelyn Guile, and welcome to Restoring Health Holistically. This evening, my guest is Dr. Ann Procyk, a naturopathic doctor whose career began in research as a biochemistry and molecular biology research assistant at Wesleyan University. At Carleton College, she obtained a BA in chemistry, designed an original synthesis of ibuprofen, and graduated cum laude. She worked as a science and engineering research fellow at Battelle Pacific Northwest National Laboratories before enrolling as a medical student. She attended the National College of Naturopathic Medicine in Oregon, obtaining her doctorate in 2000. While a medical student, Dr. Procyk's deep interest in holistic treatment of severe mental diagnoses resulted in working in an outpatient clinic treating schizophrenia and bipolar patients with classical homeopathy and nutrition. She also worked at a senior center offering low-cost naturopathic health care with a team of naturopaths, acupuncturists, and social workers at an outpatient addiction rehabilitation program. When I met Dr. Procyk in 2004, she was effectively treating mental illnesses without drugs in Mystic, and does so now at her private practice, Thornstone Integrative Health Center in Essex, Connecticut. And this evening's show is going to be about restoring balance to bipolar disorder. So welcome Dr. Procyk.
Thank you.
Ending mood swings is possible.
Yes, it is. Well, ending bipolar is possible.
Great.
Mood swings are a part of life.
All right.
For all of us.
So why do doctors make a distinction between bipolar patients and those just having mood swings?
Well, it's really a spectrum, but the critical difference between bipolar disorder and mood swings is the severity. When mood swings are happening irrelevant to the situation or unreasonable towards the situation, and they can become damaging. People can damage themselves, they can injure other people. This is through either dangerous behavior or neglecting responsibilities. That's when it becomes a medical problem that needs to be treated. So that's why we make the distinction, and it is important to know where we are on the spectrum, and to not think that everyone should be the same mood all the time, because that's its own problem, actually. But to find that balance, and everything we do, particularly in holistic health, is about finding balance.
Restoring balance.
Restoring balance.
Because the body has the ability to heal.
It does.
If everything is in balance.
And when it's given what it needs. So often when we experience symptoms, and this is of mental illness, this is of physical illness, it's because the body's not getting what it needs. And when we figure out what it's not getting, we can often restore balance.
So what is your approach to treating these severe mood swings? What are we going to call them? Mood swings or bipolar, or we're going to use both?
Well, it depends on, let's call it bipolar, because we're talking about treating bipolar here.
And that is severe mood swings.
Exactly.
Okay.
Severe mood swings that are interfering with someone's ability to live a productive, happy life with healthy relationships.
Okay. Okay.
And the real key is identifying the underlying causes. And
yes,
that is the fundamental, most important take-home message here.
Okay.
Is there are underlying causes for so many of the symptoms of bipolar, and for these irrational and surprising mood swings that can happen. And when we look for those underlying causes, we can look at this in a whole new way versus there's something wrong with somebody and they simply need a drug to suppress these swings. Instead, we can look at what does the body need to function normally.
Well, and also the drugs must be taken for the rest of your life as they stand now, and they don't really end the symptoms, they suppress them, and they have many horrible side effects. For me, it was the rapid growth of breast cysts and tumors that the drug was causing. And so the other issue is, once you restore, you find the cause, and you restore the person's ability to function, then they don't have this illness for the rest of their life. So it enables. I mean, I felt like when I ended my bipolar symptoms in 2002, I feel like a huge weight had been lifted off of my shoulders. Life was really much simpler.
Yes.
It was so much easier to function without having to deal with my own moods.
Yes.
So I am thrilled that you could come today and talk about the underlying causes, because conventional medicine doesn't address that at all. And that's why I recommend that people see naturopathic doctors, because that's how you're trained to
Yes.
look for the cause and to eliminate the cause and bring the body back into balance. So start with what's some of the primary causes?
Probably the two most frequent, which are a part of almost every case of bipolar that I've seen, are hormonal imbalances and blood sugar imbalances. These are the basic physiology of how mood swings happen. And when these two systems get dramatically out of balance, then we get very unpredictable symptoms, and mood is what we're talking about here. There are also other things that can trigger some of these imbalances, things like food reactions, things like toxins in our environment.
So we're going to talk about each of those.
We're going to talk about each of those, how they can create a hormonal imbalance or create a blood sugar imbalance.
Okay.
But what we are primarily looking at is those two things.
Okay.
And then how that creates a neurotransmitter imbalance. But that, unfortunately, even though we are talking about neurotransmitters, so often takes people and doctors straight back to that pharmacological viewpoint, which is not where we're going with this. This
Right.
is about balancing neurotransmitters.
And neurotransmitters, just explain briefly what those are and what they derive from, what's used to make them.
So neurotransmitters, our whole body is filled with all kinds of chemicals that our body makes. This is hormones, these are neurotransmitters. When we use the word neurotransmitters, we're specifically talking about certain chemicals in the brain that the brain uses to signal itself and to then signal other parts of the body to do anything from change your blood pressure to something like feeling sad or feeling happy.
Okay.
There's actually chemical signals in the body which create these
Create
feelings.
the mood changes,
Yes.
as well as many other things.
Yes.
Okay, and so these neurotransmitters. So then where do we go from there?
So as far as looking for these underlying imbalances, yes. So blood sugar imbalances, we'll start there. That's the smaller category, although not less important. But we all think of blood sugar in terms of things like diabetes. And most people have probably heard that when your blood sugar is too high, you might have something called diabetes. But the blood sugar regulation system within the body is a very complex system, and it is critical for feeding the brain. If the brain is not getting enough nutrients or too much, the brain is not functioning optimally, and it can actually be malfunctioning. So when we are talking about blood sugar balance here, we're not talking about diabetes at all. We are talking about the ability of the body to keep a even blood sugar, whether you have eaten something recently, whether you have not eaten for many, many hours or even days. And the ability to do that is the basis of the brain getting what it needs. So many people do not do this.
People who get up and don't eat any breakfast after a full night of fasting,
Yes,
that's where they start the day wrong.
Yes, that's getting off on the wrong foot. When the system is functioning optimally, we could go for days without really feeling anything other than a little bit of hunger. But most of us know that when we are hungry, and particularly if we're very hungry, we're not functioning at our best.
You can't think.
Exactly. So this is the beginning of it. And and some people are more susceptible to this than others.
Right.
Some people skipping breakfast isn't great. It's a strain on the system, but they get through the day. Some people skip breakfast and they barely get through the day, or they don't get through the day. And those are the people who have this more profound response to abnormal blood sugars. And this is both high and low, but particularly low. That's what we're most concerned about here, is when there is low blood sugar and the brain is not getting what it needs.
Not getting the fuel to
Exactly.
work. Well, in my family, most of the women have age-onset diabetes. And I'm extremely sensitive to blood sugar swings. So when I was starting to work on getting rid of my bipolar symptoms, I was eating 3 meals and 2 snacks a day just to keep that fuel into my system on a real continuous flow, so that I could think more clearly and avoid those peaks and those valleys.
That's one of the key management steps. And the sad part here is there's a vicious circle. When someone is feeling out of sorts, they often don't eat or eat the wrong things.
They eat a candy bar.
And then that makes things worse.
Right.
And so the people who most need to eat regularly, just how you said, 3 meals, 2 or 3 snacks, essentially eating something, and we'll talk about what that something is in a minute, but eating something every 2 to 4 hours these are the people who are least able to do it. So it's that vicious cycle. So they need to really put in that extra effort to do this before they're hungry, before they're suffering symptoms, so that they still have the ability to do it.
Well, and it's also, I never had a problem eating a lot, frequently. Some people might be concerned about that much, those meals and those snacks causing weight gain. But the other thing I would say to them is, if you're not eating and then you wait until you're starving to eat, that's when you push down all the wrong things and you don't get any sense of satiation, so your body doesn't tell you you've had enough to eat. So you're more likely to gain weight from starving and then pushing everything in sight down without any reflection on whether you've had enough or not.
That's totally correct. That people are more likely to gain weight by trying to not eat. Eating regularly is one of the keys to weight loss. So eating this way, I can assure you, will not only not make you gain weight, it very well may help you lose weight. And that's another bigger topic as well. But it is a weight loss diet, so people shouldn't worry about eating too much. But this also brings us to what we should be eating.
There's very
during
clear
these meals,
what.
because eating the wrong things is almost as bad as not eating, and certainly and eating just too much across the board, of course, is a recipe for weight gain. So the what of what we should be eating for these meals and snacks, it's really important to have protein and fiber, and preferably the healthy fats as well, with every meal, particularly the protein and the fiber. Those are the 2 keys, because these help regulate the body's intake of fuel and keep the blood sugar more regular. Essentially, it makes it easier on your system to function properly.
Well, and the proteins are used to create the neurotransmitters primarily.
And then there's that aspect as well.
So that's why
We'll get to that, yes.
A little bit of protein with each meal is important for that regulation.
Yes. We'll find that all of these things have multiple ways in which they're helpful. Protein is a perfect example of that. It helps balance blood sugar, but it's also critical for creating the neurotransmitters in the first place.
Okay.
But in this context, what we're talking about is balancing that blood sugar, and it is important for that.
Okay.
Not just building the neurotransmitters.
So did you want to talk about diet now or later?
We can talk about that now, because it's part of how to balance blood sugar.
All right.
So most people think of meat first when they think of protein, and that is an option. Animal products are the easiest way probably to get protein. It's not critical to eat meat to get enough protein. There are many vegetarian sources of protein as well: beans, tofu. These are fantastic sources of protein. Whole grains, that's a little bit more work. People have to know what they're after there. It has to truly be whole grains, not what's marketed as whole grains. But it is not critical to eat meat to get enough protein. It just takes a little more work if you're going to be a vegetarian.
A lot more chewing.
Yes, yes, a little more preparation
right,
too, usually.
Right.
So
okay.
And then fiber is the other key. That also helps slow down the absorption of the nutrients, so that it's the difference between a wave coming through of, in this case, blood sugar, versus a steady drip. And that steady drip is much easier for your body to process and to use properly. Instead of having to hold it back and then dole it out, the steady drip is what we want.
So when you're talking about fiber, the best sources are vegetables?
Vegetables are the best sources of fiber,
Right,
yes.
because they also have so many nutrients
In addition to the
fiber. So
Exactly.
it's not, part of the other eating issue in this country is people eat many, many calories, and most of the calories have zero nutrition. And so the body still keeps saying, I'm hungry, feed me, feed me.
Yes.
So if you're eating the vegetables with the nutrients and the protein, then you're going to have that's going to turn off that little switch on the body that says, I haven't had enough to eat yet.
Right. Yes, that's another key part of fiber, is it creates that satiated feeling that makes it easier to not eat more.
Right.
So you don't actually have to willpower your way through all of this. It starts to balance itself. That's the beauty.
And other sources of fiber for people?
So vegetables are the best. Many fruits also have sources of fiber. This is the chewier fruits, so things like apples, pears are better than something like a banana or a watermelon.
Okay.
So those are excellent sources of fiber, actually.
Okay. And then after fiber and protein, what else?
So then the essential fats, the essential fatty acids, fat also helps slow down the absorption of glucose, the sugar in our stomachs. So it also helps us feel satiated and eat less. So.
And the essential fats, talk about what those are, because when people think of fat, they think, oh, everything that's fat is bad. You know, they've been hearing this for decades.
Right.
Reduce the fat in your diet. But it depends on which fat.
We need some fat, and we need certain kinds of fat, which has coined the term essential fatty acids. There are many fats that the body cannot make on its own and are critical for the functioning of our nerve cells, of the receptors that bind these neurotransmitters. We need these fats. So these are the fats that are in fish, particularly salmon. Wild salmon is very rich in essential fatty acids. And just because people may have heard the term omega-3, that is what we are talking about here. The term omega-3 fatty acids is the specific most important fat we are talking about here.
Because it's so low in the American diet.
And almost everyone is deficient in it to some degree, some more so than
And
others.
also, these fats are crucial to the brain, because the brain is 60% fat by weight.
Yes.
And so these essential fats are crucial to creating the membranes surrounding the cells.
Correct. Yes.
So the essential fats are really essential, and they're not I guess the number is, it's estimated that Americans eat 1 omega-3 for every 20 omega-6s.
Yes.
And there should be an almost 1-to-1 ratio.
The exact ratio is a little bit up for debate. I think that will change some over the next few years, but yes, somewhere between 1-to-1, maybe even 1-to-3, but drastically different from the 20-to-1 or even 50-to-1 I've seen in certain estimations, that we eat far too much of the wrong fats and not nearly enough of the right fats.
But you can also get omega-3s in, for vegetarians, you can get it in walnuts, flax.
Flax seeds, yep, ground flax seeds are an excellent source. Walnuts, pecans, all the nuts are a source of essential fatty acids. things like avocados, coconut oil don't have the omega-3, but they are still the anti-inflammatory fats. So when we're talking about which fats to be
Good
eating,
fats.
they're part of that good fats category
Okay.
that help
Okay.
keep the blood sugar balanced.
Okay. So, have we covered the blood sugar, or is there another line here to go?
I think we have basically covered it. I just want to give an example for people
Okay.
who can know just how profound this can be. One of my a woman that I treated came in on 5 different medications. Okay, and she'd been on many others through the years. Been in and out of the hospital for several years.
And this was for bipolar.
For bipolar, yes, purely for bipolar, and the meds just weren't working. And when I asked her what she ate, the answer I got was M&Ms, and she was so struggling with life and just with existing in this world that she ate what was easy and tasted good. And over the course of the next 3 months, simply by getting her to eat 3 meals a day, and nothing out of the ordinary really, but pulling her off, getting her nutrients into her body, down to 2 medications, and doing much better. So, and in fact, at that point, she's over-medicated, and but this is what happens with the conventional world. They don't look deeper into what's really going on here. And that's not the entire cure for her.
Right.
But it's amazing how much progress you can make just with the basics.
Well, and if you're only taking 2 meds, that's, by today's standards, that's not a lot.
That's not a lot, yes.
And most people who are on 4 or 5 meds can hardly think clearly enough to take the 4 or 5 meds as they're supposed to. So, I mean, it's really, over-medication is standard operation because the medications don't work and doctors don't know what else to do, so they just throw another pill at it.
Exactly.
So I want to just tell you a brief story about a young man who came to me for a consultation, and he was having a hard time working and thinking enough to even do labor. And he said, and I said to him, "What are you eating?" And he said, "Well," he said, I don't usually eat any breakfast because I get up and I go to work, and then I usually have coffee and maybe a donut for lunch." And he said, "And after work I go to my mom's and she has chocolate cake and coffee." And that's what he was living on. And he really couldn't afford almost anything. And I explained to him about using a protein powder for a drink because he was living out of his car. And I said, "Okay, go to the store, get a bag of apples. You can have one for lunch. You can drink this protein powder, and it comes in all different flavors, but you need to get some real nutrition in your body so your brain can start working, and then you'll be able to get a better job," and so forth.
Right.
And he called me just a couple of weeks after that, and he said, "It's made a huge difference. Thank you so much."
It makes an enormous difference. I have told people just to eat a sandwich, which isn't necessarily the best meal ever, but simply having some protein in the form of a meat, a few veggies, put some lettuce on there.
Tomatoes.
Exactly, and on a whole wheat bread, and like I said, it is not the best, but it is a place to start, and it is so much better than
Junk
candy
food.
or chocolate cake,
Yeah.
or Doritos,
Or donuts, or
yes.
junk food is basically devoid of nutrients. So,
Right.
so if you're going to eat, make sure those calories have some nutrition in them.
Yes.
Okay, so on to hormone imbalances.
So hormone imbalances are the other major category of where the dysfunction lies.
Okay.
So, and hormones are a very complex topic, which we really only understand the surface of. How all of our different hormonal systems are interrelated.
Yeah, they interact, and
is
so you
very
mess with one and
complex. Yes.
you stir the pot with all of
Yes.
them.
But we are all very familiar with things like PMS, premenstrual syndrome. That's an example of dramatic mood swings coming from, in a severe case, coming from hormones.
Right.
Okay, and that is only one part of it, but that's an example that we're all very familiar with of how hormones can sort of, if you have experienced this, kind of can feel like they can just take control of your body.
Well,
or maybe you've witnessed it in a loved one, and
right,
so,
a wife, a sister, a spouse,
yes,
or yourself.
where it feels like, there's almost someone else in there.
Right.
And that's how powerful hormones can be.
Right, right.
And in bipolar, we're actually talking about an even deeper, more powerful level, because it's not just the female hormones, and it's also the adrenal hormones, thyroid hormones. These are critical for how we keep equilibrium in our body. And when particularly the adrenal gland gets overtaxed, we do not respond to stresses the way we would think we would, the way a healthy person would, and then there is this stimulus response, and then there is a pendulum that starts swinging where the adrenal gland is always trying to catch up, and then it has nothing to do with what's going on
Okay.
in the situation. It is a hormonal imbalance in the person.
Okay, so talk a little bit about what makes the adrenal connection that you've been talking about.
So the adrenal glands are how our body handles stress.
Okay.
So this is what we're all most familiar with is adrenaline.
An adrenaline surge.
So, yes, if you've ever been in a near-miss car accident, something like that, you feel that immediate kind of hot, tingly, maybe even sweating, maybe even your heart racing, and you're very alert.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And if you've ever tried to do something at that moment, you're stronger than you normally are.
Right.
This is where the
But
stories
not necessarily
come from.
more rational.
That is true. That is true. You are alert and you are strong, but not necessarily more rational. And that's only one aspect of the adrenal gland. That's the most quick acting and therefore most noticeable part of the adrenal gland. But the adrenal gland also produces cortisol, it produces DHEA. These are the basis for our functioning throughout the day, where we do not get as strong a reaction. We're never going to feel a cortisol surge. But when our cortisol is too high or too low for a period of time, or swinging between too high and too low, we feel off. We feel dramatically off, and it can create these kinds of mood swings.
Is that when you have constant fatigue, or can have?
It can be that. That is a later stage,
Okay.
where it is
Adrenal fatigue.
Yes, where someone will just feel tired all the time, or foggy-headed, or both. All the time. Okay. But earlier in the process, it's more of a swinging. It's more of a back and forth where there's this overreaction, this kind of an almost adrenaline-like surge, and then this collapse afterwards.
Which we all like that surge. It's the collapse.
That's the problem.
No fun.
Exactly. And after, there may be some trigger that sets off the initial surge, but after that, and then there's a crash, and then there is a secondary surge from the adrenal gland. It has nothing to do with what's going on, but suddenly the person is feeling wired again, and potentially not as rational as you put it. So this is where it can kind of come from inside, and the feelings that the person has are outside of the situation,
outside of reality,
to reality.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the conventional world doesn't really look at this. It says your adrenals are either working or they're not, and that's not really how it works. It's more of a slide. It's this. There's an in between where adrenals can be working but not well. It's kind of the car that's limping along versus running smoothly, and there's issues there. And when the adrenal glands are given what it needs, and we'll talk about this a little bit more with the nutrients, but it becomes smooth running again, and then moods become responsive to the situation versus coming out of nowhere.
Well, what a lot of people don't realize is that by skipping meals and not eating, it puts their body in a state where their adrenals turn on to keep things going. So lots of times your stress can be simply from not eating regularly. You're putting your body in a stress situation.
When the blood sugar is imbalanced, part of the backup system is the adrenal system. And so these two things are also interrelated.
Yeah,
and
just
that's why
connected.
why we're talking about them together, is because each affects the other. If your adrenals are not working well, you have less control of your blood sugar. Poor blood sugar control is another strain on the adrenals. And the more these two things are out of balance, the more out of balance the person feels.
Well, and the one thing that I try to tell people too, to help them understand, remember this connection, is that when you have an adrenal surge, your stress hormones go up. And the way the body brings them back into balance is to inject insulin in. So that's why so many people living in our 24-hour, 7 days a week, stressful, we've overscheduled ourselves, live in a stressful environment, are becoming type 2 diabetics, is because the body keeps pushing insulin in to counteract and bring them out of all this stress. And so we're on this terrible wheel where our stressful lives are causing us to become type 2 diabetics. And then if you add in the lousy eating habits we have, we really have a mess.
Right.
So, okay,
and then we can
on.
talk about sleep as well, because that is part of the adrenal component here. We all recognize that sleep disruption or your sleep pattern disruption is a big part of bipolar. Not sleeping enough, sleeping too much at times, going back and forth between the two. And that is one of the key symptoms of adrenal imbalance.
Okay, so when you're working with bipolar patients and they're not sleeping, which many of them do not, especially when they're in the manic phase, then what, so do you address that through the adrenals?
Yes, by supporting the adrenals, it lessens that problem.
Okay, so it's not a sleeping pill.
No,
which worsens the problem.
No, it's not that knocking someone out and trying to suppress the problem. It's going underneath and finding the root of the problem, which adrenals is often a big part of the root of the problem. When you support the adrenals, that normal sleep pattern starts to come back, not because they took a pill that knocked them out, but because they're more even throughout the whole day and they can naturally fall asleep at night, the way our bodies are essentially designed to.
Okay. How are allergies involved in all of this?
So allergies are another whole category of ways that our body can be hypersensitive and create this inflammatory response that manifests as bipolar. So allergies come in many forms. We're all familiar with hay fever and environmental type allergens. There also can be food allergens. Sometimes they are very obvious, but sometimes they're not actually true allergens. So this is another reason that the conventional world doesn't recognize allergens as an issue here, because quite often people are having reactions to foods, chemicals, and that's chemicals in foods or chemicals in the environment, which aren't true allergic reactions, but they are inflammatory responses.
They're sensitivities.
Exactly.
Right.
That lead to a hypersensitivity in the nervous system, and then again that starts the imbalance.
Well, allergies trigger inflammation, and inflammation is one of the inflammation of the brain is part of all the mental illnesses. So definitely with bipolar, but with all of the other ones too.
Yes.
So this is not unique to bipolar. This is really a part of the mental disorder spectrum of allergies contributing to the severity.
And a great many physical diseases as well.
Okay,
this is,
right.
This is
heart disease,
key
cancer.
Factor. Yes.
Inflammation is a big factor.
And inflammation is a giant category. To say if someone has inflammation is sort of like saying I ate food for breakfast. It's very non-specific. There's many different ways we can have inflammation. And that's why it's related to so many different kinds of diseases. One person can have a sensitivity to, say, gluten, and it can create bipolar type symptoms. Another person, it will create digestive problems.
Right.
Or arthritis.
Right.
Even though it's all the same or
Inflammation.
It's all inflammation.
Right.
But it's all different kinds.
Well, and it exhibits differently in different people.
Yes.
And so it's unique to that individual.
Exactly.
Is the increase in bipolar diagnosis today due to this toxic overload, do you think?
There's really no clear evidence for that, but I think as we use more chemicals, particularly endocrine disruptors, which many of the pesticides are, and we're getting these chemicals into our bodies through our food supply and through our water. That's another strain on this entire hormone system that we've been talking about.
Right.
So it is likely a contributing factor that leads to this hormone imbalance, that leads to these hypersensitivities that create these symptoms.
Right. And what about the nutrient deficiencies?
So nutrient deficiencies are another whole category that comes from our poor eating habits. Okay, when the body doesn't have the building blocks to say make adrenal hormones or to make neurotransmitters, well, there's just nothing it can do. It's like trying to run a car with no gas in it. Everything could work, but it's not. So, and that's where nutrient deficiencies come in. And so when we talk about eating, it's not just about balancing blood sugar, it's also about giving the body the raw materials it needs to function.
And we've talked about the basic categories such as protein and fiber and all of that. But to use the car analogy, you can have all the fuel in a car that you want, but if the spark plugs don't work, then nothing's going to happen.
Right.
And in the body, it's the enzymes that require the vitamins and minerals that are found in the vegetables to digest and to make all the different things that the body uses as fuel. So we need a variety of foods to get the variety of nutrients for this wonderful fuel mix that the human body works on. So what do you do lab testing, or how do you detect these deficiencies?
So it's a combination of lab testing and looking for clinical signs. And by clinical signs, I mean symptoms that the person has. I may be treating someone for bipolar, but if they also take medication for restless legs or have cramps in their legs or feet every night, those are big signs of a magnesium deficiency. So these are clues outside of their bipolar symptoms that tell me what may be contributing to their bipolar symptoms. And I use magnesium as an example there because there is no great test for magnesium. We can test blood levels of magnesium, but that doesn't tell us what we need to know about the body's stores of magnesium.
Just what's in the system, fluid.
Right. So we're also looking at clinical signs. Other nutrients, such as B12, we simply do a test for. Okay, and then we look at the test results and correlate that with what's their symptoms are, and we can do some analysis that way.
Let's talk for a minute about bipolar children, because you say that that's quite different than treating adults.
Well, it's different in that I am very hesitant to diagnose a child with bipolar because it's almost always a combination of these factors, and in a very treatable form, meaning with adults it can take a long time to undo some of the damage that's been done. In children, they respond very quickly. And when we look particularly at what are they eating, and children are particularly susceptible to blood sugar imbalance, we've all witnessed the child who misses a meal or misses even a snack and suddenly becomes a behavioral nightmare. Or the kind of the converse of that, the birthday party where there's an excess amount of sugar. And some of the kids, many of the kids become not their normal selves. And those
Whirling dervishes is more like it.
And those are sort of the more mild responses. And that's true of even healthy kids.
Right.
Whereas, in kids who are having much more severe issues, these problems are that much more dramatic, and probably they're that much more deficient. Their diet may be that much more irregular, but they will also respond that much more dramatically to these interventions. And so before even putting a label on them, which teaches kids all sorts of problems,
Right.
to just work with the basics on, are they getting what they need to function?
Enough
And
fuel.
Enough fuel, even
High
amounts
quality.
of fuel, exactly, and it makes a profound difference.
So that's where you start with a bipolar child, is really with nutrition.
With nutrition, and then after they are getting good nutrition, then looking at what
Remains.
What remains, exactly.
Okay.
What else needs to be done here?
Okay, so I think you have a slide about what's important to balance a person's brain chemistry.
Yeah, we have already kind of touched on a lot of these factors as we've talked about food, but these, well, let's go over with the children because that's up right now.
Yeah.
We've already talked about this some, but children in particular, they need to eat every 2 to 4 hours, and more children are on the 2 side than the 4 side.
Okay.
We know this already. There's snack time in schools,
For a reason.
For a reason, exactly. And they need to eat protein regularly. So ideally, every one of those meals would have both protein and fiber. So giving children, crackers, which isn't the worst thing possible, but it's just not as good as it could be. And particularly in children who are not thriving or experience these dramatic problems, they need better nutrition than that. So,
Okay.
And
So the most critical nutrients.
so the most critical nutrients, we've already talked about these some, but essential fatty acids.
Okay, I think we have
Yep.
the slide up. There we go.
Essential fatty acids, protein, magnesium, B vitamins, and then limiting sugar. That's the take home. Essential fatty acids, to review what those are, that is the kinds of fats that are not available in our food supply, or that our body cannot make. It needs to get it in the food supply. We cannot make it from other fats.
Right.
And it's critical for the brain to function
So fish
properly.
and raw nuts and flax seeds are some of
Are
the
the best sources of it.
And,
Yes.
Okay.
Protein, meats, poultries, tofu, beans, and protein has the amino acids, which are the building blocks of the neurotransmitters. And you don't need to eat any particular amino acids. You don't need to look at particular types of protein. You simply need to get enough protein for the body to know where those different amino acids need to go to make whatever
Because the
neurotransmitters
protein
are in question.
is the building blocks. And I think another thing is people need to know if they're sick or they've had surgery or undergone any kind of illness, the proteins are used for rebuilding. So you need to up your protein a little bit if you're recovering from surgery or been through, in any kind of an illness.
Correct, because during those illnesses, we break down our own muscle to get that protein, and we need to rebuild that so you have your store.
Okay. And let's talk about the importance of exercise, because one of the things I said to my psychiatrist many years ago was, when I exercise every day, I feel like I'm a different person.
And that's so common. We all need to move our bodies. It's absolutely critical. People with bipolar, it's that much more important to get that daily movement and to keep all of this in balance. Exercise strengthens the adrenal gland. That's one of the ways in which this all comes back on itself.
And it reduces your stress levels too, doesn't it?
It reduces stress levels through how it affects neurotransmitters, actually.
Okay.
Actually changes some of our neurotransmitter balance so that we feel more positive. And that, essentially reduces our perception of stress. So that's another way that it works. It also improves our blood sugar balance.
Because, how does that work?
So blood sugar, exercise makes us more sensitive to insulin. So
Okay.
insulin works better
when we've
when
exercised.
yes, during and after exercise.
So,
And the key there is after. It's not just while you're exercising.
Right.
It has an effect even after you've been exercising. Your body's in a healthier state, and you better respond to what you eat. So,
okay, great. And what do some of the studies show in terms of mental illness? Any come to mind on exercise and mental health?
The studies on exercise and depression are numerous. I mean, in over 50 of showing positive effects of exercise on depression. There's several meta-analysis showing that exercise is almost it's as good as certain drugs, almost as good as other drugs, and also to certain therapy techniques. So exercise is powerful. We think of it as just this adjunct, but it's powerful. I do not know of any studies that specifically look at exercise and bipolar.
Okay.
So,
well, as a former bipolar person, I can say that it really always made a difference. I called more in the depressive phase. The manic, you don't feel like you need exercise, you think you can fly, but...
exactly. Well, bipolar is, half of it, or often most of it for some people, is the depressive phase.
But
so,
I found exercise to be the best temporary antidepressant.
that fits.
And you needed to do it every day. I mean, if you've gone out hiking for a whole day and got a lot of exercise, you'd still feel pretty good the next day. But it is a temporary fix.
The weekend warrior isn't enough. It has to be. It has to be a part of your daily life as being active. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So what should patients expect when they seek a naturopathic doctor for treatment? How do you approach this?
So, depending on where they've been, they're probably going to experience a longer first visit than they've ever experienced before, where a naturopath will ask a lot more questions to get to the root of all of these issues that we're talking about. We're going to do the process of digging deeper and to see how all these issues play out in the individual. For some people, it may be really more on the hormonal side. For some people, it really may be more on the blood sugar side. There's always going to be a little bit of both. Some people may be highly sensitive to all sorts of food chemicals, and the key may be there. But that's all going to come out through questioning and through testing. So there's going to be a lot of questions being asked, and that can be frustrating, but it should also be seen as this person's really trying to understand you. And you're going to be treated as an individual, not just another person with bipolar. And here, try this drug. Oh, you haven't tried that drug? Try a different drug. We're going to get to the bottom of it and start healing you from the inside.
Did you have a couple of other cases that you wanted to talk about?
One is a child who had been diagnosed with bipolar because nothing else had worked, and I see this a lot of children who have behavioral issues. They're struggling at home, at school, and it's very inconsistent. And first they get labeled with ADHD, and those meds make it worse instead of better. And so, well, it's not that. It must be and they go through all something like defiance disorder, and then finally they get to bipolar because they're a little bit older, and sometimes they're fine and they do really well, and sometimes they're doing very, very poorly. And in this case, it was a combination of food sensitivities. For this boy, it was removing all the food colorings, food dyes, okay? And that's a very common one. It's not always the big bad chemicals. It's sometimes the things that are deemed safe for our food supply. So food dyes are a big one. Okay.
And do you think that they're more a problem for children than for adults just because of their small body mass?
And they often don't detoxify them as well because they're younger. Their liver is not functioning as well. So, and yes, and they also I think some people are just different. I think there's plenty of adults who have these sensitivities as well. But this was a case of a boy who went from deeply struggling to a month later, parents, school, even he said he felt, everyone said it was about 75% better. He said he felt like a different person. He said my body doesn't run away with me anymore.
Interesting observation.
Yes. So he felt like he was more in control of his own body, his own life. So, and then the other part of it for him was eating regularly. He was a very picky eater and tended to not eat regularly, or just he would get into a state and then refuse to eat. And then of course that would feed on itself. So just working with his parents about what they needed to do, how to counteract this, working with him as well. By the time I saw him, he was 10 and had the ability to start to see some of these cause and effect relationships. When you drink the purple Kool-Aid at church, you don't feel good. You didn't have fun that night.
Makes you crazy.
Yeah. You got in a fight that night. But the last 6 times you were there and you didn't drink it, you didn't get in a fight. These kids were your friends instead of your enemies. And there's this just intense reaction that can happen. So that combined with eating regularly made a huge difference for him, and no longer needed medication, which in my opinion he never needed in the first place. But
just needed a little deeper look at what the cause was.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And another case?
Another case, I'm thinking of she was probably 28 or 30, a woman who had been bipolar, more on the depressive side, and spent most of her time on the depressive side, but then would kind of have these bursts where she would work 80 hours for 2 weeks per week for 2 weeks, and then crash again.
Right.
And for her, the real thing was a lot about blood sugar, but also the B vitamins in particular. When we didn't spend a lot of time on that, we kind of skipped over it.
We have about 8 more minutes. So talk about B vitamins.
So the B vitamins are critical, because they are the food for the adrenal gland.
Oh, okay.
So once her adrenal gland was functioning more properly through having B vitamins, she could regulate her response to stress much more appropriately. So something would happen that she would get, she'd do these work projects, but she could still sleep instead of being so overtaken by it that she wouldn't sleep and then cause that crash. And so the B vitamins were the true key for her.
And talk about the best source of B vitamins.
So B vitamins are in your leafy greens, and this is not so much lettuce. This is the greens you cook, things like spinach, collard greens, kale, chard. These are the leafy greens that have
the high nutrient leafy
the best
greens.
Sources.
Or romaine lettuce is pretty good
is also fairly good. That's B vitamins. Also has a lot of magnesium. We talked
in
about
the greens
magnesium a little bit. Yes.
Okay.
So, as well as many other antioxidants, which are also important.
So eating salads on a regular basis is huge. Huge.
Yes. Yep. B vitamins are also in the whole grains. Again, there's so much marketing right now with what's a whole grain and what isn't a whole grain. The whole grains mean you have to eat the grain kernel, not you have to eat flour that was made from a whole grain. So that's important to really reintroduce some of these grains into our diet, which have basically disappeared from our diet entirely.
Yes, with the processed food.
Whole grain cereals, things like Cheerios and Wheaties, are not whole grains. They are processed grains.
And there's a big difference.
And there's a big difference,
right.
Exactly.
Right.
So.
Well, we have about 5 minutes left. So, what's your take on rolled oats? Is that a whole grain?
Rolled oats is not is no longer a whole grain,
Okay.
but it is less processed than a flour. So it is. It's in the middle.
Okay.
Okay. It's in between a true whole grain, which is the best source, and what we call a pulverized grain, which is a flour. Okay. It has been steamed and rolled, so it's been slightly cooked, and started to break down mechanically, but not as much as being ground into a flour.
Where you
So
lose almost everything.
Exactly. So it keeps somewhat more of the enzymes intact.
Okay.
So it is easier to digest because of
I
that.
always felt good when I eat rolled oats, and I wasn't sure because
Steel cut oats are even better. That's where it's even more intact.
okay, so that's why they're rising in popularity as people learn
Exactly.
about that.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, one of the things that I wanted to be sure to mention was Dr. Procyk. I met her before my first book came out, Healing Depression and Bipolar Disorder Without Drugs, because she volunteered or agreed to heal a severely bipolar woman who lived nearby, who had contacted me and had very few resources in which to try and treat herself. And you made such a huge difference and this woman's story is in my first book, chapter 14, in Tracy's recovery. She went from being suicidal, bipolar, with suicidal tendencies, which she had had since the age of 13, until she came to me at age 42, and she had been on 30 different drugs over 17 years, I think, and none of them had worked. So Dr. Procyk agreed to treat Tracy holistically, and within 2 months, as I drove Tracy to and from the appointments, she was no longer suicidal. She was no longer crying every 20 minutes, and she was actually starting to laugh and make jokes. She had a great sense of humor. And within 5 months, she was off, well, I think you took her off the meds pretty early. But within 5 months, she was no longer on any medication. She was using supplements, and she was laughing and joking, and she was able to go and get a job.
Yeah, she became
And
so much
she
more
became functional in 5 months after all of these years. So healing bipolar is possible, and getting rid of the symptoms is possible. There are hundreds and thousands of us who have done so, but no big drug industry advertising to let you know about it, which is why we are here today. So thank you so much for what you're doing and for agreeing to come and share all of this information with us. And
You're welcome.
I
Thank
am
you.
just always glad to see you again too.
Yeah.
And go to her business, Third Stone Health in Essex, if you have bipolar disorder, and allow her to help you figure out the underlying causes. Please tune in next Wednesday, when Ellie Brown, the owner of the Center for Pain Relief, will introduce the use of energy for healing in energy medicine. I hope you will join us again. Thank you and good night.